The EU's 2030 targets. Joining us today are two experts, Elmet Reichel and Sanadu, who work in this specialized area. And we're, of course, going to talk about waste and what it means and how we achieve these targets. But before we get started, I'd just like to say if you have any questions or comments on today's subject on waste, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments section. Today we are streaming on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so you can put them in the comments section there and we'll make sure our experts see your questions or comments. Now, just to introduce the subject, we did launch a briefing on household municipal waste and the EU's 2030 targets, and we will get to that shortly. But I guess, Elmet, let me start with you. What are we talking about when we talk about municipal waste?
Yeah, municipal waste is the waste that you and I produce on a daily basis in our households, like the food waste, the packaging we have, all the broken stuff we put into our waste bins. And that is from our households, but there is also similar waste generated, for example, in offices, in other places, which is also called municipal waste.
Mm-hmm. And how big of a problem or challenge, as we like to say, is household and municipal waste?
Yeah, it's actually quite big. Like on a per person basis, European citizens generate about 500 kilogram of that waste every year. And that amount has been stable or even growing over the past year. So it is quite a lot we have to deal with. And currently only nearly half of it, but not even half of it, is actually getting recycled.
So that's quite a large sum already that's getting recycled.
Yeah. We are up to 48% of recycling of that waste at the moment.
Okay.
It has grown a little bit, so we are getting better on that. But still, more than half actually goes to either landfill or is incinerated.
Yeah.
So we are losing those resources, which could be used in a much more smart way.
Yeah. Senna, of course, I'll get to you on prevention in a sec. But so we talked a bit about non-recycled waste, and municipal waste are the same thing as household waste, I guess. So what happens to this leftover waste that is not recycled? You mentioned landfills. What other? Yeah. What happens to it apart from landfill? We try and avoid landfill where we can, right?
Yes. In the EU, we have the so-called waste hierarchy. And landfilling is at the bottom of the hierarchy, so we really should avoid it. A bit better is to use the energy of the waste, but it's only a bit better. We really should strive for, in the first place, not generate all that waste, and if that's not possible, to reuse or recycle it. And the amount that is currently not recycled, it either goes directly to landfill, where it can generate, for example, methane and other emissions, or it is incinerated, and in many cases we generate energy from it, but we can't use it for anything else anymore except of that energy.
Yeah, okay. And so how can we prevent household municipal waste?
So there are, as Elmet mentioned, the waste hierarchy, the top priority is to prevent waste. We can do it by thinking of what we are buying products with a good quality that we intend to use for a long time. And when we don't like it any longer, maybe, give it to someone or give it to charity or donate it or sell it on a second-hand market so someone else can use it and enjoy it. We can also plan, just taking a few examples. So if we have something that's broken, we can try to repair it or hire someone that can repair it for us and we can use it again or sell it. And a last example, like food, we can plan when we cook and of course save leftovers in a good way. So that's just some examples. We have to just plan a little ahead and think a little more long term.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about waste prevention. What about consumer behavior? How does that come into effect? What are we working on there?
Yes, we're working also the European Commission. It's the top priority of waste prevention in two of the policies. Waste Framework Directive, which tells all countries to develop waste prevention programs. And as a part of those, it's also how to stimulate sustainable consumption It could be like using clothes libraries instead of buying new clothes. You're going to a party, and instead of buying one dress, you can rent it in a clothes library.
Mm-hmm.
So they promote those models, for example. And it could be like not buying fast fashion, buying more good quality that you can wash many times. I'm using an example of textiles, is that something a lot of us buy, and it's increasing rapidly, that waste stream.
We had a good discussion with your colleague, our colleague Lars, a few weeks ago on this very issue, which is very interesting. Well, now I think we've set sort of the parameters of our discussion today. Perhaps we could just get quickly back to the briefing and discuss what the briefing was about. What did it say?
Actually, we have quite a lot of targets in the area of waste. And for municipal waste, we have a set of targets that all EU member states have to meet. They are targets on how much waste should be recycled. There's a target for recycling of municipal waste. At least 55% should be recycled in 2025. 60% should be recycled in 2030, and then up to 65% should be recycled by 2035. These are binding targets. All member states have to meet those individually. But then there is also a more general target on the EU level that comes from the Circular Economy Action Plan that the Commission has published in 2020 that says we should halve the amount of that waste that is not recycled, so the so-called residual waste, by 2030. And that is a target which is based on the absolute amounts of what we generate, not on the shares of how much is recycled.
So this sounds a bit more difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and so what we have analyzed is if all member states would actually meet that target to recycle 60% of their municipal waste by 2030, would that then automatically mean that this overarching target to reduce the non-recycled municipal waste would be met? And what we found is that unfortunately not. And the main reason is that while we are increasing and getting better on recycling, we are also increasing the amount of municipal waste that we generate.
Yeah.
So it would be important to reduce the amount of municipal waste that is generated. Then we have a good chance to meet that target as well.
Yeah, and do we already know what's the most difficult area? Like, for instance, food waste, or what areas of the non-recycled waste are the most difficult to handle?
Yeah, food waste is actually a type of waste that we know how to handle.
Yeah.
There is a target, or not, there is an obligation for all the member states to collect it separately to be implemented by 2023. And we know that from food waste and garden waste can be handled together. You can compost it, you can put it into a biogas plant and generate energy, and the leftovers can be used as fertilizer. So this is something we know how to handle. Yeah. But then there are products where there is currently very difficult to recycle, or where we don't know how to recycle them, or technologies are not available. Think of nappies, baby nappies, for example. Or we also have a lot of plastic products which currently are not recyclable because the way they are built is too complex.
Like black plastic, for instance.
For example, black plastics, which gives problems in the sorting plants. But therefore, we concluded that it would be important to focus the waste prevention efforts on those wastes which are not recyclable or very difficult to recycle.
Yeah. That's anecdotally. I mean, we've just started the sorting in our municipality. Yeah. And indeed, I have 2 small children, and diapers is a problem getting it because they've given certain sizes of bins. So. Yes. But indeed, it's a challenge for all levels, governments and consumers alike. Of course, if you have any questions or comments on today's issue, please feel free to note them on our LinkedIn or Twitter channel, or on Facebook as well. We're checking that as well on our Facebook side. When we'll get to those questions, I already have some coming in. We have one from Twitter already, from Jude, which you touched upon. Is this work achievable, these targets?
Well, our analysis shows that the recycling targets for the countries, they should be achievable. There is already countries who are at that level and who have worked on moving there for a number of years. And in principle, we know how to do it and which instruments can be used to get there. For preventing waste, it's a bit more difficult because it means changing behaviors. It means it's not only behaviors, we also have to change the infrastructure. If there is no repair shops, then you can't get your product repaired, for example. It's not only the consumers who have to adapt, it's the whole system who needs to make it possible to do that. And the design of the products needs to enable that they don't become waste very quickly.
So perhaps on the prevention, I mean, how do we prevent this stuff to begin with? I mean, consumer, we've talked very briefly on changing behaviors, but what other aspects is the EU and the EEA looking at in this area?
Yeah, so just to adding on what Almut said, that we think that the infrastructure has to be developed more, so it's easier to do the right thing according to the waste hierarchy. This morning I was walking to the bus, I saw a lot of furniture outside people's houses, and I know it's a collection of bulky waste. So that's actually collected as a waste, but it should be just as easy to put it out and collect it for reuse and to prevent the waste. So that's something we have to work on. At the EEA at the moment, so we are making an assessment of how waste prevention is the progress on European level, and we're right now developing an indicator framework with a set of indicators to measure progress and see, are we going in the right direction or what more has to be done? And that will give us more information. Currently, we're not measuring waste prevention and there are no European indicators, but hopefully in a few years.
Okay, thanks. Let me get to some questions here on LinkedIn from Koen. Hi, is there any reliable data available per country, region, and material type? How much is recycled?
It's a bit mixed. We know how much municipal waste is generated and how much of that is recycled. That the member states or all the European countries are reporting that to Eurostat, but they don't report it on a material basis. But from mid this year, this will change because the reporting rules have been changed. So we will in the future have better data. There is also data for packaging waste, and that data is reported by material. So we know how much of the plastics, how much of the packaging waste that we have is plastics, metals, wood, paper, cardboard, and so on. And we also know how much of the plastics, paper, and so on is actually recycled. But for the municipal waste, we hope to have the better data later this year.
Okay. Another data question from Edward. Most importantly, if we should discuss the very inappropriate data you receive, especially WB, I'm not sure about that. Okay, the data are rather wrong or informal. Using those data for planning will create extra problems.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah. Most importantly, we should discuss the very inappropriate data you receive, especially from WB. What did we say? West Balkans. We'll touch on that actually. I'll get to that because we did launch a separate briefing on that. Perhaps you can start with.
I can start with
that. That's basically what it's about.
Yes. Well, the data quality, it is improving over time. That's definitely what we see. It's not perfect. And yes, the Western Balkan countries are also reporting data, but that data is of rather low quality. And the reason is that for getting good data, you also need to invest. For example, if a landfill doesn't have a weighing bridge, and the data that is collected on how much waste is generated, it's based on an estimate. Well, if you see a truck coming in of that size, that it will contain that many tons of waste, that's of course a lot of uncertainty. And we also know that especially in the Western Balkan countries, there is a lot of informal activities. So marginalized population parts who like go around and they pick valuable waste directly from the bins. and sell it to recyclers. Of course, it gets recycled, but there's no data on what is really the amounts that go in that direction. So those countries, they have a challenge to improve the data, and we know that there is activities in those countries to work on improving the data. But it is it will take time, but it is really important to know how much waste is generated, because if you plan for a facility and you don't know how much you have to plan for the capacity, then there's a risk that you overinvest or underinvest.
Yeah. I guess we should add that these are cooperating countries that we work with. They're not members of the EU EEA, but we're cooperating with them to improve their data flows and how they tackle these environmental problems like we all are trying to do. And interesting, you mentioned how we collect the data for these weighing scales. How does that work?
Well, in any waste treatment facility, usually in Europe, there should be a weighing bridge. So when the truck comes to the facility, it drives on a weigh bridge, and then the weight is registered, and then
the total mass of
the truck, and then the waste is released and into the facility, and then when the truck leaves, then it's weighted again, and the difference is the waste.
Right, and that's one sort of waste, or are they sorted afterwards then?
That depends on the facility. It can be in a facility, a sorting facility, then what comes in, of course, is what is collected. And then usually the facilities also, they register how much is coming in and how much is going out in which direction. If you have a sorting facility, then they have to register how much plastic do they sort out, how much metals do they sort out, and so on.
Interesting. Another question on LinkedIn. Parallelize the biomatter waste in biocar. Problem solved. So we hear the problems. If some of us have the solutions you are looking for, how do we contact someone to propose these solutions? So it's about bio waste, I suppose. Do we look into that at all?
Yes, we look into bio-waste. We have published a report 2 years ago about how much of bio-waste we do have in the municipal waste, and how much of that is food waste, how much of that is garden waste. And looking into the data, we concluded that around 1/3 of all the municipal waste is actually bio-waste, food waste or garden waste. And as I explained before, we know what to do with that and how to manage it properly. And we also know that there is research work ongoing on how to deal with that waste, maybe make more value of it. Maybe some of it can be used as animal food, or there is more advanced options that could be used to get higher value out of that waste. But this is an area of research where we don't work on that. That's research organizations which look into that.
Okay, great, thanks. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please get in touch on our LinkedIn or Twitter pages, and you can drop your comments or questions into the comment section, and we'll make sure our experts see it. I guess if we can look at the broader policy framework and all this, what the EU is doing, and there's a lot of talk about the European Green Deal and circular economy plans. Perhaps you can talk a bit about the circular economy aspects first, if you want.
So there have 2 new initiatives have been launched this spring, actually. The first is the textile strategy, which aims to make sustainable products the norm in the EU. And it will empower consumers by giving us more chance of having a good information on the products. How is it being produced, the value chain, what do I do when I have used it, how do I use it in a sustainable way, and so on. But also it's setting some requirements that products that are put on the European market should be reusable, recyclable, upgradable, and those types of measures, requirements, and also non-toxic, so they shouldn't contain hazardous substances. So that's one initiative. It also prevents destruction of unsold consumer goods. Today, things that haven't been sold, textiles for example, can be destructed. This will be prevented by some kind of, what should we call it, transparency. So you can still do it, but you have to show, like, we destructed so and so amounts of products, and explain that for the consumers and have some motivation. The other initiative, that's for textiles, and it's, maybe that's what the first one I took, so I take the other one, Sustainable Product Initiative. And that's the setting requirements on all products to fulfill certain requirements. And all these measures, the goal for them is to create a circular economy where we don't have this take, use and throw away, but more use and use again and use again and use again in a loop. A non-toxic recycling of material. That will reduce our footprint.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And the amount we put in our trash.
Yes.
European Green Deal, if you can, how does this fit into the European Green Deal, all this?
It's all part of the European Green Deal. It's the overarching objective is to create a circular economy, moving away from this model of take, make, use, destroy or throw away. And there's a lot of different elements of that. And one element is the waste side of it, and moving towards recycling, better handling of that waste. And the other part is to enable that we use less materials and throw less away in the end, and make those products that we have like longer lasting, so that we don't need that much materials to use. And I think the current situation on the world market with growing prices for materials, well, we can see that this is the right approach, because we will not have as much materials very cheap in the future.
Indeed,
and we need to move into using all the materials much more smarter than we have done so far.
Okay. I have some more questions here. From Paulo, preventing waste to be generated needs a shift towards a service economy where it's a business interest producing and using products that are durable, reusable, easily repairable and upgradable, and only at the end, recyclable. What initiatives are expected at the European level to promote products as a service business model?
Well, that's also part of the Sustainable Products Initiative, actually. And I'm using that myself right now with my bike. Instead of buying a new bike when I move to Copenhagen, I use a service. So I use a bike, and that's made in a way that it should last really, really long, and it's easy to repair. And if I want to repair it, this service provider does that for me. So that's one of the circular economy business models that the Commission is supporting now through the Circular Economy Action Plan. And so I think a way to do this, like some countries have introduced a lower tax on repair services, for example, and that's encouraged by the Commission in the Waste Prevention Program as some measures that countries can take. So which make it more affordable or more attractive to repair something compared to buy something new. Today it's often more expensive to repair many products.
Indeed, and all the phone chargers we have, Commission's thankfully looking at that as well. One single model that we can use on all our phones.
That's one example.
Rather than collecting an assortment of
But a way to promote it also could be to set reuse targets also, which we don't have today. That countries have to, increase their ambitions even more. And there are coming some proposals now in the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. That's going to happen next year, but the preparations are going on right now, and we are supporting that revision.
I have another one from Gabriel. It's very important to develop a strategy for communication and to have facilitators to be in permanent contact with the waste generator. Perhaps this again goes to consumer behavior, changing consumer behaviors. I mean, that seems like a very long process, but let's look at some examples we've had in the past about plastic bags. The bans were embraced by consumers fairly quickly.
Yes, especially the single-use plastics, so plastic bags, but also single-use plastic containers for food, takeaway food, and so on. The Commission or the EU has taken an initiative and with a single-use plastics directive, and we can already see now that some of the products are not on the market anymore, and for others, the member states, the EU member states, will have to work on reducing those. And there is under discussion a lot of instruments, for example, putting a tax on or specific fees on some products that we want to reduce. And many countries have introduced taxes on plastic bags. And that's one of the areas where we really can see it worked. Even if it was only like
10 cents or something.
10 cents or something, it did work. So, but of course, it's always the question, which instrument do you use for which kind of target?
And right now we're seeing that with plastic straws as well, where some big restaurant chains are switching to paper straws instead.
Yes. Of course, there's a question, just switching from plastic to paper, is that really a good solution?
And what kind of paper is it?
Question. Yes.
Okay, and we've got more comments coming in from Wasim. What about EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Models in the EU? Anybody want to explain what that is?
Yeah, do you want to go?
I can explain it.
Yes.
It's an instrument which has been used for quite a while, especially for packaging, but also for electronics, waste electronics, e-waste. It's an approach where the producers who put some product on the market also have to pay for collecting it at the end of its life and to manage the waste. And they also have to meet some targets, for example, recycling targets. That's the currently most used approach for extended producer responsibility. There's now, based on the experiences we have made in Europe with these instruments, the new Waste Framework Directive set some additional requirements on how to design such EPR instruments, because they do not always work like perfectly. But the approach as such is used more and more widely, and also has been proposed for using on textiles, for example.
Oh, interesting. Because, for instance, right now it applies to television sets correctly, or there's a charge when you purchase the new TV set, but they're obliged to take it back for recycling.
Exactly. And the idea was that this would incentivize the producers to design the products in a way that they are more easily recyclable. This has not always worked, so there is a need to adjust this instrument so that also it gives these incentives to change the design.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but we have time for a few more comments. From Adele, municipal waste data became more complicated. I think we have to utilize artificial intelligence programs to analyze the people consumption behavior, locations, to predict the actual types and quantities of generated waste so we could prepare suitable infrastructure. To what extent are we digitalizing this whole process? Because we're talking about a lot of data collection at the sites and so forth.
Yeah. Of course, if you have a very simple system where you just collect the waste and send everything to landfill, then you don't need very sophisticated data. But if you want to move towards proper management of that waste, moving towards recycling, reuse, you need a better basis for planning also. If you want to plan a sorting plan, you need to know, well, what is actually in that waste? And then you need to analyze it, otherwise the planning is faulty. And, well, there is, of course, more and more used also like intelligent ways to collect the data. There's also so-called pay-as-you-throw schemes where people pay for the waste depending on how much they produce, and then can be weighted when they put it into the bin. But that's not very common yet in Europe.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask, can we ever get to net zero waste?
Net zero doesn't exist for waste, and zero waste is certainly an ambition where we want to get to. at least zero waste that we throw away. And we should strive for the waste we still produce to reuse it, to recycle it, so that it becomes a secondary resource.
And some final tips for people at home on household waste. How can we prevent it?
How we can prevent it? Think of what you really need to increase your well-being and live a happy life, and what is just what do you buy because you think you have to buy it, and because you're affected by commercials and so on. And what you use your money for, how you spend your time. Sometimes shopping doesn't really make us happy. We can maybe be with friends, be in the nature and so on. So I just think one more time before you buy something.
Great, thanks. That's all the time we have today. Thanks for joining us. We will be back actually next week on chemicals. So hopefully we'll see you then. Bye for now.